Hello, everyone, and welcome. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded. Feel free to follow us on social media. On Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third, and on Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR. Please tweet anything you learn or any thoughts that you have from today's discussion with the hashtag Learning Tuesdays, and we will be sure to retweet. Once again, feel free to follow us on Twitter at Reading by Third, and on Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR to share any thoughts or questions that you have from today's discussion. Okay, once again, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I will be behind the scenes helping to produce this webinar. I have just a few housekeeping tips before we get started. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure to select panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement by posting questions in the Q&A box. We will dedicate the last portion of this discussion to respond to the questions you post. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be emailed to all who registered. We are also live streaming this session on Facebook. Lastly, we will be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during the Q&A portion and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement at the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Lastly, I would just like to call everyone's attention to the fact that the Campaign for Grade Level Reading will be taking a brief holiday break and will resume its GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars on January 12th. During this time, we do wish you and your families a very happy and healthy holiday season. Upon our arrival, we will have a Learning Loss Recovery Challenge webinar on Tuesday, January 12th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, titled The Way Forward, Guided by Lessons Learned the Hard Way, a conversation with Randy Weingarten, AFT, and Becky Pringle, NEA. Joining you now is Jill Fioravanti with the CGLR, and thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jill Fioravanti. I'm a senior consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, and we welcome you to the last webinar of GLR Learning Tuesdays 2020, Scaling Playful Learning, How Civic Infrastructure Can Support Young Learners. This discussion builds and expands on a GLR Learning Tuesdays session in July that featured the work of Playful Learning Landscapes and Too Small to Fail, and a funder to funder conversation last month that again featured Too Small to Fail along with its partner, the Laundry Cares Association, among other speakers. And we've had several other webinars recently that have showcased innovations in technology and media-based tools to reach families and young children outside of the classroom. All of these sessions and conversations lift up the importance of taking a learning happens everywhere approach to advancing early school success and to addressing head-on the learning loss recovery that will need to happen in the wake of COVID-19 by really meeting families and children where they are. Through sessions like these, the Campaign for Grade Level Reading seeks to capture the energy around the movement to transform formal and informal places and spaces into learning-rich opportunities that inspire a community-wide commitment to children learning. And we recognize this can happen in many different ways. You're going to see lots of examples over the course of the next 90 minutes. And we're really looking forward to hearing your questions and thoughts and perspectives and the work that you're doing in your communities, large and small, to bring a learning happens everywhere approach to informal places and spaces across the country. You can go to the next slide. We have a stellar lineup today. The full bios along with the slide deck were sent to registrants earlier today and are found on CLIP, which is our network learning platform. As we get to each of our speakers, I'll share a little bit more about each of them, but I'd like to just first say a hello to Helen Hadani, who also joined us in July. Helen and I are co-moderating today. We're going to be passing the baton back and forth. And in a minute, I'm going to turn it over to her. She's going to share and really ground this session with the research that she and her colleagues have done at the Brookings Institution about scaling playful learning in urban communities across the country and across the world. Following Helen, you can go to the next slide. We're going to hear from three presenters. Anna White will talk a bit about how the National League of Cities Early Learning Nation has supported cities around the country to build the blocks for early learning across civic infrastructure. And then we're going to have two case studies. Bosmat Sfadia-Wolf with the city of Tel-Aviv, Yafo, Israel, is going to speak about the work that's happened in that community to lift up these issues and these topics and really infuse play across that city. And then Dia Wright will actually go before Bosmat. Dia is going to speak about how the city of Milwaukee has done the same. And we're really excited to have such a diverse and interesting set of perspectives on this topic from not just this country, but across the world. And then we're going to have some commentary by Shaban Reardon, who has a deep history and background in the public library system and is going to be providing feedback and thoughts on what we've heard. We have this session divided into kind of two segments. This first part is going to be presentations from each of the people I just mentioned, followed by some Q&A from that they'll answer from all of you. And then we'll have a second part of the session that looks at action planning and how to really make this happen in your communities. Each of our speakers will share a bit more from the action standpoint, and then again, we'll go back to question and answers, and Helen is going to be moderating those for us. So with that, let me turn it over to Helen Hadani. Helen is a fellow in two different centers within the Brookings Institution. She's a fellow with the Global Economy and Development with the Center for Universal Education, and also a fellow with the Metropolitan Policy Program in the Bass Center for Transformative Placemaking. I really encourage you to look at the bios of not just Helen, but all of our speakers. She has a really interesting background, having spent 20 years in research, education, and really looking at the connection between education and play and child development. So I'm really excited to be able to have Helen back with us today, and I'll turn it over to her for a presentation, and then we'll go from there. Helen, it's all yours.
Thank you, Jill. Good morning, good afternoon, and maybe for some of you, good evening, and thanks for joining us today. Next slide, please. I'm here to talk a little bit about scaling playful learning in cities and focusing mainly on a recent policy report coming out of the Brookings Institution that I co-authored with my colleague Jennifer Vey. Next slide, please. The report summarizes key takeaways from interviews with national nonprofit organizations and city and community leaders who champion playful learning approaches to building more child-friendly cities. So many of you may recognize some of the organizations here. Today, we're going to be hearing from Bosmat on Urban 95, the Urban 95 initiative, making cities better for our youngest citizens and their caregivers, and also from Anna White from the National League of Cities and how that organization supports cities across the US to be more child and family friendly. Next slide, please. So I'm going to outline and go through rather quickly because I know you're probably anxious to get into the details of it, and that's what's going to be shared later in this webinar. But just to provide some framing, I'm going to go over 5 key steps that cities can take to adopt and scale playful learning in their communities. The first is around coordination within and across city agencies that's needed to support the design and integration of playful learning efforts into new and existing projects. So change at the city level is unlikely without the commitment of the mayor or someone in the mayor's office. But scaling playful learning also requires institutionalization and coordination across city agencies, from public works to transportation to parks and rec to maybe even also the health department. And so later in the webinar, we're going to be hearing from Bosmat about how Tel-Aviv Yafo, that municipality in Israel, provides an example of how agencies can effectively infuse play and prioritize early childhood development and learning in their work. We're also going to be hearing from Anna White from the National League of Cities that's going to talk about this growing trend in the US to have early childhood staff positions to facilitate cross-agency collaboration. And I believe Dia is also going to lift up examples from her city of Milwaukee along those lines. Next slide, please. Secondly, cities don't have to start from scratch. Here's the good news. They don't have to start from scratch because there are national organizations, many of which who are already deeply engaged with local philanthropic, civic, and neighborhood organizations and groups to support playful learning. And those organizations can help to maximize what are often very limited resources and help to increase impact of playful learning initiatives and programs. Next slide, please. And what we highlight, one example we highlight in our policy report is Kaboom's Play Everywhere initiative that has spurred new collaborations with community partners to transform many different spaces in the community, including, as you see here in the photos, a staircase, pedestrian and bike trails, transit centers, laundromats, sidewalks, into places that promote exploration and imagination. Next slide, please. We also talk about in the policy brief, Too Small to Fail, which is the Clinton Foundation's Early Childhood Initiative. And they've created this very unique and productive partnership with the Laundry Cares Foundation to transform laundromats into playful literacy-rich spaces. So for many families across the country, they spend a couple hours minimum in laundromats on a weekly basis. And so to take advantage of that time, to maximize that time for learning, as you see here with the young girl reading with her caregiver. Next slide, please. Thirdly, working with local partners often spurs meaningful engagement with the community, which leads to a better understanding of the community's needs and ensuring local buy-in. So as part of Michigan's Great Start initiative on early childhood, we feature in our policy brief a faith-based initiative in Detroit, which encouraged caregivers and parents to talk, read, and sing. This was a campaign that was co-created with Too Small to Fail to talk, read, and sing with their children. And next slide, please. And then we also talk about Blake the Brownsville Bee. This was a campaign and a character that was created by local designers with input from the community residents as part of a campaign to transform your daily or weekly trip to the supermarket into a learning opportunity by having simple signage, for example, in the dairy section saying, "Where does milk come from?" for example. Next slide, please. Fourth, to reach busy and overwhelmed parents and families, messaging needs to be shared in the most clear and concise ways and in various formats and venues. So we talk about Chicago Play Streets and how they had a communication campaign that focused on the important link between play and healthy development, and how closing streets can be a low cost and effective way to facilitate fun, exercise, and social interaction. And also showing that this clear communication with the residents about an implementation barrier helped to message to the residents that didn't want to move their cars off the street, and a good reason for moving their cars, and how that can lead to many benefits for their community. Next slide, please. And lastly, we talk about clearing the way, that cities can engage in playful learning through many entry points, but they need to streamline the processes and practices to more seamlessly embed playful learning in urban design, in the urban planning and design decisions. So while finding common ground can be challenging because you're bringing together two different fields that historically don't talk to each other, the learning sciences and placemaking, or urban design and planning, One way to overcome that challenge is to focus on training the current and future generations of urban planners to embed playful learning into projects from the start, so they're not seen as an added effort or cost. Next slide. And then just to wrap up quickly, with crisis, our current world is going through a crisis, comes opportunity. And that's an opportunity to use this moment for communities to extend beyond traditional education programs, to create an ecosystem of learning that maximizes the chance for children to engage in playful learning as part of their daily routine. I'm going to turn it back over to Jill now, who is going to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Helen. And we wanted to start with Helen because, and we included the research that she and her colleague Jennifer Vey did around scaling playful learning in the chat box. We really encourage you to download it, read it, and it really builds out beyond what Helen had the short time to be able to present here today. But I think you'll see that there's really a role for civic infrastructure. There's a role for communities at the ground level, in the more formal institutional level, to be able to bring together these different sectors and fields to really advance playful learning for young kids and their families. And it leads perfectly into our next speaker. So if you could go to the next slide. I'm really privileged to be able to introduce Anna White, Program Manager with Early Childhood Success with the National League of Cities. CGLR has a long history with NLC and a strong partnership with NLC, particularly around its Early Learning Nation initiative. Anna comes to this work from a really interesting background. She worked for the Office of the State Superintendent of Education in the District of Columbia. She has a background in National Head Start work and also state Head Start work. So she's looking at this work through the National League of Cities from how to support civic infrastructure in cities across the country to be able to advance learning and in informal places and spaces, but also from a real child-centered background. So I'd love to turn it over to Anna and she'll take you through her slides. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be here and participate in an exciting conversation on how to infuse more playful learning opportunities in daily life and how local government can be helpful. Next slide, please. So those of you who don't know us, the National League of Cities, we are a membership organization. We represent more than 20,000 cities, towns, and villages across the country. Most of our membership are local elected officials, as well as their senior city staff. So we work directly with mayors, council members, city managers, and senior staff at all different department levels. Next slide. I work for the early childhood team within the Institute for Youth Education and Families. We've been doing this work for about 20 years. This is our 20th anniversary. We just had a meeting last week where we heard from a number of different mayors who have been with us from the beginning. And one of those mayors was Mayor Andy Burke from Chattanooga, Tennessee, and who, I'm reminded of his words. He said that, if we start with making cities great places for young children and families, everything else falls into place. And I think that pretty much sums up the mission of what we do within the Institute and what we're trying to do with the early childhood team. We work in over 50 cities across the country. I was thrilled to see a number of them here represented on this call. If you want to go to the next slide. I come to this work through our Early Learning Nation initiative. I know some of you are familiar with this work, having collaborated with my partner and colleague over at the Center for the Study of Social Policy about 5 years ago, I guess now. We came together to really think about how can we help support communities in becoming early learning communities, and what does it take for a community that prioritizes young kids and families. And so that's where we came up with the building blocks for success. They're centered around 4 key pillars. I think today we really want to focus on that pillar 3, neighborhoods where families can thrive. And that's how a lot of our cities had gotten into this work around playful learning, is really thinking about how we can support young families in the neighborhoods they live. How can the built environment be supportive as well? Next slide. And so through that, we've come up with an early learning community action guide that really breaks down what those 4 pillars are into some tangible targets and action steps for communities. And then just last year, we released a digital version of that early learning action guide and a progress rating tool that really helps communities assess where they are and develop concrete action plans. I know my colleague over at the Center for the Study of Social Policy is working with a number of Campaign for Grade Level Reading communities on developing action plans as well using this framework. So I'm glad to see so many of you here doing that as well today. But today we really wanted to talk about some tangible strategies for engaging with your city leaders around playful learning, and what are some of those key departments and agencies that can be helpful along the way. So if you want to go to the next slide. So once again, this is the building blocks. And so it's really centered around kind of 3 main targets, but for our purposes, we've been working with cities around target 3.1 and target 3.3, really thinking about how can the built environment be supportive? How can residents really feel a sense of hope and belonging in their communities? And I think my colleague, Wright from Milwaukee will get into that a little bit later with the work that they're doing in Milwaukee around their Milwaukee Cares initiative. But really, how can you create spaces and environments that really show city residents that the city cares about young kids and families? So next slide, please. So when it comes to trends that we're noticing, I think we're noticing kind of 4 main trends in terms of transforming public spaces for early childhood. I think the first, and probably wouldn't come as much of a surprise to those on the line here, is really thinking about how to engage city libraries in this discussion. I think we're seeing a big trend to public libraries that are able to facilitate greater interaction between young children and their caregivers. So a great example here is the Chicago Children's Library, but there are others, but really transforming libraries into places where you can really encourage greater interaction between families and their young ones. Another thing that we're seeing that I know Helen mentioned is just a greater collaboration between different departments. So one of the trends that we're noticing across the country as well is city libraries coming together with other agencies like the city Parks and Recs department to really think about how can we infuse learning into play spaces and how can we bring some of those early literacy opportunities into community spaces. So those are exciting ways that, you know, just by coming together and collaborating, we can re-envision what these spaces look like. Next slide. Another opportunity to engage with a department that traditionally we don't think of as being involved in early childhood is your city transportation department. Another great example are some of the New York City play streets, but I think we're seeing this in urban areas across the country, is really thinking about how we can reimagine streets to incorporate more playful learning opportunities and really engaging with their transportation department. But also in sort of taking that play happens everywhere kind of approach and really thinking about how do we infuse early literacy messaging into our public spaces. I think working with your transportation department is another great way there to think about, are there messaging that we could have at bus stops? Are there messaging that we can have on train stations? And I think that's definitely a trend that we're seeing and something that's relatively easy cost, but also a way to really drive home that message of, you know, the city really cares about young kids and families, and how can we get that messaging out to a broader audience. Next slide, please. Another third bucket I think that we're seeing a lot is really thinking about how the city can use its role as a convener and use its role at the bully pulpit to be able to bring community partners together to really think about how we can re-envision community spaces. So collaboration between their cities and community partners to bring early childhood opportunities to laundromats and grocery stores. I think we're going to see this a little bit with Milwaukee and some of the work that they're doing with the Laundry Cares Foundation to bring early learning spaces into laundromats, but we're also seeing it in places like Philadelphia that have been able to engage with their grocery stores. And it's another example where it's a win-win both for the city in terms of bringing awareness, but also for the commercial spaces as well, to really be able to bring people together, have them use their space, but also as a way to attract young kids and families. The next slide. And then the fourth trend that we're really seeing is thinking about how we re-envision civic spaces. I think here at the National League of Cities, we're really big on trying to help city leaders think about what does it really mean to authentically engage with residents. And so, and part of those residents are young kids and families, and really being able to create spaces that work for them. So we're seeing a big trend in city government to think about how can we encourage more families to come in and be part of those civic discussions. So things like offering drop-in childcare during city hall meetings, but it goes and extends beyond that to really think about, you know, where are the civic spaces where young kids and families are. So places like, you know, city hall, learning spaces at family courts and departments of motor vehicles, thinking about messaging and sort of those places where families are most likely to visit. So WIC offices are another one that we're seeing. So I think those are kind of the 4 big key things that we're seeing in terms of trends in city government. But I think one of the things that we're also noticing during this time, I think, you know, not that there are many upsides of COVID, but it's been an opportunity for city governments to really think about how can we collaborate across departments and come together. And I think, you know, with so many kids who are learning virtually at home, it's been an opportunity to think about how we can support kids when they're not in a traditional school environment. So really taking that learning happens everywhere approach to really think about how we can support parents as their child's first teacher and their educator in some of these public spaces. So I'm not going to take up too much more time because I think that there are some really great panelists who are going to come after me to really showcase what this exactly looks like in cities across the country, for example, in Milwaukee and in Tel Aviv internationally. So I'll leave it there, but I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you so much, Anna. I wrote down the question you said, what does it mean to authentically engage with residents? And I think that's really at the heart. And when we think of residents, those residents start as little as at birth. So the question that you brought up, I think, is something that's a theme that we're probably going to hear throughout the course of the next 90 minute or next hour and the first 30. I'm really excited to, you can go to the next slide. I'm really excited to move into the case study part of our webinar and to introduce Dia Wright, who's the director of the Office of Early Childhood Initiatives with the City of Milwaukee. You heard Anna talk a little bit about Dia's work. She comes to this work again from an interdisciplinary standpoint, has a bit of a background in Head Start also, but she was a teacher, she was a supervisor, she was a manager. In school-based setting, she's now moved on to the city side and is a parent herself and really looks at this from a very much of a parent-centered standpoint. She has some work that I'm really excited to be able to lift up to all of you on how the city of Milwaukee has really used its civic infrastructure and civic leadership role to advance early school success for our youngest learners in the informal places and spaces and meeting people where they are. So I'll turn it over to Dia and she'll take you through some of what she's done there.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me, first of all, GRL, to talk about our efforts in Milwaukee around this work. And again, good afternoon to everyone. Like Jill said, I direct the Office of Early Childhood Initiatives for the City of Milwaukee. Please, next slide. I have to remember to say next slide. The OECI opened in November of 2018 and representing the city's interest in ensuring Milwaukee children ages 0 to 3 and our pregnant mothers have equitable access to evidence-based early care and development programs and services. We want to help children prepare for kindergarten. We have about 600,000 people in Milwaukee and about 9,000 babies are born each year. So scaling playful learning for me is about, and I'm sure for many of you, is about access and exposure and repeated opportunities. To me, we have a job to shift the atmosphere, shift the mindset, to make this a norm so it's not some special thing. Next slide, please. So since I've been in this role in a short time, Milwaukee Cares has emerged and really is a concept that started with the question of how do we make sure, right, that the Milwaukee community members and visitors know that Milwaukee cares about young children, especially our young babies. Oftentimes when you go to a city or to a place, they're known for special things. When some think of Milwaukee, I like to say they might, words that might come to mind are baseball or basketball or beer even. And I'd like to add babies to that alliteration. So we have to work together to make sure that happens here in our city. Next slide, please. And so part of making sure our babies have the best opportunity, children have the best opportunity or chance at thriving, we have to work with our partners and bring everyone along. This work is not lifted by any one person or office alone. And so we consider our partners to be anyone living, working, or playing in the city of Milwaukee. Next slide, please. So part of our work to advance Milwaukee Cares did rely on resources from the National League of Cities. I'm very thankful for their support and their help. We use the progress rating tool that you heard Anna talk about, so I don't need to focus much on the details of that, but we did use the progress rating tool, and we were able to bring a sampling of folks from many sectors and capture their feedback about Milwaukee and its early childhood care and education community and the environment, and really find out what did people know, what were they thinking about our current state in terms of early care and education, and what should our priorities be. And again, everyone from politicians to healthcare workers to people that would label themselves as a parent. And I'm taking this list from how people identified themselves, maybe early childhood educators or practitioners and administrators. So across the board, these folks got together and spent some time together to go through this progress rating tool. Next slide, please. And so what came out of what we learned, again, bringing people along and making sure if we're going to be on this journey to shift minds, that we're all kind of doing it together. Many things emerged, but what we will be focusing on, we meaning OECI, the Office of Early Childhood Initiatives, will be that building block number one, which is community leadership, community and public will, commitment and public will, I should say. And three things we will be looking at, and I hate to give a number because then it's like, okay, what order is first? You said three things, but we will be looking at a campaign to promote the importance of early childhood care and education. We will be looking at dedicating specific space, like a website, to all things early childhood and education, because it was realized that calling an information line that's very broad based might not always get down to the nitty gritty of what folks were looking for, and can be overwhelming. So we are in the process of developing a website for that purpose. And finally, to continue to bring together those folks from cross sectors, especially making sure that our parents are a part of our processes and have a voice in every step of the way, are playing an integral role. So that's part of our plan. Next slide, please. So we are embarking on a soft launch of a Pop Spot campaign. And the Pop Spot campaign was created by my office in conjunction with the creative geniuses of a local marketing firm called Serve Marketing. And again, we have a soft launch starting for Pop Spots. And really, a Pop Spot reminds a parent to create their learning environment whenever and wherever. I like to say, get it in where they can fit it in, because there is a prime time for their child's brain development that can't wait for the perfect setting. Can't wait for the child to get to school, or, for this optimal time. The optimal time can be at any moment. And so we'll work hard to spread the word, not about Pop Spot per se, but the why behind the behavior of what we're trying to support parents to do. In our Pop Spot, we will support the Room initiative that says parents already have what it takes. And we also promote Too Small to Fail's Talk, Read, and Sing. Next slide, please. So a soft launch of Pop Spot, like I mentioned before, has occurred. You're looking at an 8-panel insert that was included in our water bill and that went out to 163,000 households. And we wanted, it was important to capture even folks that, again, that maybe that didn't have children, because we know everyone started off as a child, and we need everyone, you know, old and young, right, to lift this work. And so this was in the water bill, as well as parts of this was featured on our Milwaukee County buses, again, as a soft launch. I will point out a few of my favorite things. There's a blue panel that you won't necessarily be able to read, but the blue panel is a poem that was created by a local artist in Milwaukee. And the poem speaks to the caregiver, the mother, the parent of this baby, as a way to say, you know, we are with you, we support you in your work as your child's first teacher, and you've got this. So thank you. So that's one of my favorite parts. Next slide, please. And so other things that are happening around PopSpot is we ask for businesses to figure out how they can infuse or create a PopSpot in their waiting areas as well. And so you're looking at some images of our women, infant, and children, our WIC clinics. There are about 8 WIC clinics in Milwaukee, but 3 are operated by the city of Milwaukee, our health department. And so the 3 clinics will be kind of undergoing a facelift, if you will, that will bring colors and learning environments for children. So we're excited about that. This is in the works and hope to be unveiling very soon. Next slide, please. This is more, you're looking more at the WIC clinic and just how, you know, currently sometimes waiting areas might appear not necessarily conducive to have a young child waiting, which, you know, as we know, also makes it a little bit more challenging for the parent who's trying to then entertain or capture the young mind. Next slide, please. Here's an example of our work with national partners, Too Small to Fail, inside of one of our courts. There's a before picture and after picture. Very proud of this work as well. And installed in this picture is the Family Replay and Learn space that Too Small to Fail and Laundry Cares that we also do inside of our laundromats. Next slide, please. And so I just want to highlight and point out that other parts of our, within our city, folks are playing a role in creating outdoor environments as well. And so the picture you're looking at now is an initiative by one of our aldermen, and it's called MKE Plays. And this was again conceived by Alderman Michael Murphy, and it aims to transform 14 of our city's most deteriorated playgrounds into models for local collaboration and renovation. The next slide should show you what this space looks like now. So that's, I wish I could see your faces. Hopefully someone said, wow. Next slide, please. And so I also wanted to highlight and showcase the work of our public school system. Milwaukee Public Schools, the largest school district in our state, has a unique department called Milwaukee Recreation. And the rec department plans to revitalize 52 Milwaukee play spaces. And so there you're looking again at a before and after picture. Thanks for the wow. Next slide, please. So I want to say thank you, and again, we'll talk again more later, but it's so important to note that different parts of our city, you know, we're all working towards the same goal. And so one of the things that I feel like Milwaukee is doing is trying to work better together to achieve more. So thank you again.
Thank you, Dia. You got a bunch of wows and amazings and thumbs up in the chat, particularly in seeing the transformation. And I just want to make the comment, and someone said it in the chat, the optimal time can be at any moment. And I think that's a really powerful point that I hope everyone really takes away from this conversation and from your remarks. Just before I introduce Bosmat to give us our second case study, I really just want to put a plug in for you to ask questions, put them in the Q&A. We have 2 different opportunities for questions in a few minutes and then later on in the session. But we'd love for you to be able to get anything on your mind answered from our panelists and our commentator and our co-moderator. All right, so if you can go to the next slide, I'm really excited to introduce Bosmat Sfadia-Wolf, a director with the Community Planning and Development Unit of the city of Tel-Aviv, Yafo, Israel. Bosmat comes at this work from an architectural background and has a really interesting position in the city that really is, as you've heard from today, all about intersectionality, about the cross-sector nature of this work and how to really use civic infrastructure to codify and to put into action the kind of early success outcomes we're looking for our young kids and our earliest learners and their families. So I'll turn it over to Bosmat. She's going to share her screen and walk through her work with you.
Okay, I hope everybody can see. I can say good night from Tel Aviv. It's almost it's after 10 p.m. here. So I'm very excited and very thankful for the opportunity to be here with you. And I love the last 2 presentations of Dia and Anna, and thank you so much. It was so inspiring for me to hear the work you've been doing. So I'm here to share you some of the perspective we did in Tel Aviv, Israel, how we implemented Playful strategy into our urban landscape design. Our work started 3 years ago. My position in the city has been as the project manager of Urban 95, which is a collaboration for the BVLF Foundation and the city of Tel Aviv. And the idea of Urban 95 is really to ask questions of the city leaders. What would you do? What would you change if you could see the city from a 95 centimeter height, which is the average height of a 3-year-old? So in other words, we're asking how we can adapt the city to the needs of young parents and their families. There is a network today of more than 12 cities around the world that are partnership with Urban 95, working with different cities, and I'm here to share with you the story of Tel Aviv. Just to give you an insight, I know probably some of you, it's new for them. Tel Aviv has a population of more than around 500,000 inhabitants, residents. And almost 8% of our residents are young children, early childhood, between the age of 0 to 4. And probably as other cities in the world, and of course in the US, we are looking at so many changes that are happening rapidly. And there are so many gaps that are created. Our national government did not take any responsibility of this age group, and it really affected the municipal responsibilities. So I can say that our biggest challenge was the lack of awareness about the importance of early childhood and how to make city leaders take this responsibility on different fields. It could be from education, community, health, and etc. But today I'm here to talk about the urban planning perspective. And this is where you see the map of Tel Aviv and the spread of children on the neighborhood level. We were asking ourselves, how can we create better life on a daily basis? Where do we meet parents and young children? For us, our starting point was the idea of 15 minutes neighborhood, which says what kind of services, it could be public spaces, community services, etc. you can have within 15 minutes distance of walking or driving within your neighborhood. We shortly understood that this is not possible to have without cross-departmental collaboration in order to have holistic view of the needs and solutions of families in the city. And even more, we need to find our champions within the system and help them and make them take the first leap of faith. So I'm here to introduce you just one of them for our story. This is Yoav. He's the manager of Parks and Gardens, director of the city of Tel Aviv. He was the one who was most skeptical about his role and of the impact that he can has on children and parents, young families in the city. But after working with him, which probably we're going to elaborate later on, I can say that one of the most interesting said he told me once, that working with us with the program opened up him to new ideas of early childhood and public spaces, how they might look when there is greater flexibility and where is more, the public space is more open and inviting. So we saw him as a champion of early childhood, the one who can become a brain builder himself. And for him, we gave him tools that he could create better impact at his work. I'm going to share with you 3 of our main actions that helped us really to put playfulness strategy as a scalable and sustainable system that works with the city. But yes, we start by working methodology of doing some experiments and pilots. One of them happened just 3 years ago when we asked ourselves, how can we dream big? What does it mean having a playful city? Let's make it visible. So we had this idea that started with this sketch, as you can see here on the left, that takes the main square of Tel Aviv, which is just under the city hall, and turn it into a pop-up playground. And our mission was to invite all parents coming for free and enjoying for 3 days event, just playing with children, having this connection between caregiver and children being more strong, and to let them experience what kind of free play we're talking about, because it is a different play than instructive play that we're used to. And we want to give parents these tools to be themselves as teachers, learners for their young children. So probably you recognize these blue blocks that we had coming in, and it was just beautiful to see how parents sit down. We have really great climate in Tel Aviv, sitting down on the grass, playing with the children and just enjoying it. It was so visible that even the mayor from his top floor was watching it and then came down to talk to parents and see how they experience this beautiful event. We had also some toys shed, which are today spread in all our public playgrounds in the city, where parents can come and just borrow some toys for free on the way home when they go with their kids to the nearest playground. Also, we developed some new sandboxes. Sand, probably, I guess, also in other cities in the world is an issue of maintenance. And for parents, it was a big dislike. They didn't like the idea of using sand because of health issues. Here we had an experiment of trying to have this sandbox that could be closed by night and then reopened by day. And it was a huge success. All these elements you just saw now were implemented around the city. It could be in libraries, it could be in different community centers and their public spaces. Another story that it brings me to tell you today is how we worked with data. Because I think and I saw a question of how to work with the city decision makers and how to make them take responsibility or change the way they work. I think for us, data was really a key move. I can tell you that the city of Tel Aviv invested more than, for us, it was like 13 million shekels on new equipment that will be implemented in more than 100 playgrounds around the city. And what they renewed was really high quality equipment. We came with a really interesting research done by the foundation that says, do you know that 87% of time children are not playing on this equipment? So the question is, what are they doing? So they're doing other things. They're playing, they're wanting different experience. And this is really where we began a process of shifting existing resources and budget to new directions based on the new data and knowledge we brought in. An important step for us was also to make it sustainable. So this is why we wrote a program of architectural planning based on the Urban 95 principles, which involve reference to physical condition adjusted to the needs of young children and their caregivers. In addition, we understood how important it is to work with the community itself. This is why we always conduct, or at least try to conduct, a broad public participation, which is an online survey that we share with parents around the neighborhood, where they can really put in their request and choose their preference and needs. Another data that we are trying to always conduct is observations, because we want to assess the usage of visitors and how they if they are satisfied. I can tell you that it's really important for city leaders to see if their customers, here as residents, are satisfied. For example, here you can see already a playground that has huge part of it of sand. And it is a decision that has to be taken. Of course, it has budget issues and maintenance issues, but once you have residents satisfied, it really brings in the awareness for decision makers to be more involved with this. So just to share with you some of the main data that we conducted was to see that how these playgrounds are more likable for children. We saw more children from very early childhood, for 0 to 4, being there. Their parents are coming more than once a week, and they're even visiting for a longer time, which is really great data for us to continue our work. Just to share with you, one more tool is an assessment tool to evaluate playfulness in playgrounds. And what you see here is actually based on 4 types of play. You can see physical play, free movement, sensory, or social and imagination play. With all this, we have an explanation why this is adding value in each one of them. And once we have all 4 of them, it could be in a playground or just in any other landscape in the city, we know to tell the city where to put the budgets in what direction. We want to see all different type of plays happening in the same place. So we know that we are really bringing in these playful opportunities for young children and their families in the cities. So this is happening in various playgrounds around the city, just to give you a look. And my last, I think, a story I want to share with you, and it was also mentioned before, what kind of opportunities we can see during the COVID-19. And I can tell you that the city of Tel Aviv decided to close down streets, probably as being done in other cities in the world. But it was not enough just to close it for cars. And we need to make it a place, to make it a better place for public life. And for us, it was a really great way to work with the city architect and to have some tactical intervention of urban intervention and saying, why not make it a really good place for everyone? Once you do something good for kids, it could be also good for elderly or for everybody. And also in the times of the crisis, good for business, because people want a place to stay in and not just to walk by. As the way we work, we did some observations, and we saw great satisfaction of users and visitors of the facilities and other activities that are taking place there. Of course, we looked at our 4 types of play. We saw a lot of joint parent play together. We saw some really great connections happening between neighbors in the community that were not happening before. And of course, what we should make even better at this area. I was really happy to see that play was one of the most dominant activities being seen in this, especially for young children and their needs. So I just want to finish up with a quote that I really, really like, being said by our Director General, Mr. Leiba, who says that Urban 95 is not just a program, but a way of life, which means that it's not something which is trendy. It's not something that's going to go away. This is the way to make a city looking at the needs of young children and their families and make it sustainable and scalable. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I love not only the visuals, but also the content and the perspective that you're sharing. And there was someone in the chat just wrote, yes, planning with, excuse me, someone said, yes, planning for and with children makes cities more equitable and just for all populations. And I think that's very well said. And thank you for all that you've done and showed us today. We're going to have a chance to have some commentary. I'm thrilled to be able to introduce Siobhan Reardon with Riverfront Associates. Siobhan comes to us with a deep background in public libraries, having led up the Free Library of Philadelphia for 30 plus years. She is not a stranger to the campaign. She's been following our work and has been involved tangentially with our work through direct involvement with the campaign's effort in Philadelphia. And she's going to be talking a bit about both her perspective from her career, but also what she's heard over the presentations here today and what she'd like you to be thinking about when you think about scaling playful learning in your own community. So I'll turn it over to Siobhan.
Well, thank you, Jill, and hello, everyone. Good afternoon on this, what is now becoming an extraordinarily chilly afternoon here in Philadelphia. We're waiting for a big snowstorm to make a way. Forgive my, everything's falling behind me. So what I wanted to say thank you to everybody who made these presentations. They are literally fantastic presentations. of different ways to think about how it is we can best work with children and families, particularly as we all know, so many of our children are, come to learning in very different ways. And it's been, sort of my life's work, particularly in my work in libraries, to think about the fact that not all children are nominal learners. There are children who come to learning who are tactile learners, children who come to learning who are auditory learners. Know this personally just because of the way my own son came to learning, and a lot of the thinking and work that I have supported and looked at when you think about the work of public libraries going forward had a lot to do with my experience with my son. So, so when you think about the importance of play, as you've been listening to these wonderful presentations, I love the fact that not one size fits all. We have to really think about the kinds of spaces and where the spaces are and who the communities are that are going to be most willing to support this sort of change in the way we think about supporting families and particularly children as they live through their growing experiences. At the Free Library, we had a number of opportunities to change the way we did our business, particularly when it came to children and the kind of spaces that we had in place. And I have to say, while I am envious of all of the, listening to Milwaukee and the references to the National League of Cities and of course, Tel Aviv, the amount of public funding and public support that is in place to support the changes, the physical changes necessary to make a lot of this happen. What happened in Philadelphia was largely supported by private dollars. God bless the William Penn Foundation and a number of others. The PNC is a local bank that supported. What began was an initiative called their Grow Up Great program. And it's where we received a grant, and it's where we learned that play was fundamental to a lot of families. Just sort of all of that energy that children need to not only to sort of experience, but it's how you build the vocabulary when you're having these very qualitative interactions with using play as an opportunity to, when you think about, walking down the street, you have your child jump and they can count their steps, or you think about, grab a thing of chalk and have them do a hopscotch board, that kind of thing. So creating the opportunities for play on the streets, which is where most of this work occurred, was fundamental. But the other thing we also learned in a lot of these pilot opportunities was the importance of having community organizers help engage the community in the kind of civic assets that were available to the community as learning opportunities. Because, most of us understand and know that there is this 30 million word gap between a child who comes from a family, middle-class family, versus a child. The word gap is 30 million. A child hears 30 million more words if you come from a middle-class family versus a child who comes from a more difficult socioeconomic family. So in order to deal with that, we were looking at the kinds of things that would help bridge those gaps, and clearly play got to that point. The other thing is we began to take a look at the spaces that libraries have, and getting away from the sort of very formalized desks and chairs and rigid hard spaces to much more open expanses. You saw a picture of the Chicago Public Library in the National League of Cities presentation. It was, those are the types of spaces you see a lot of public libraries in particular coming about, and beginning to understand that interaction, that playful interaction, not only helps build a child's vocabulary, but also helps build the confidence in them being able to have these important conversations with adults in their lives. So one of the other things that you've been hearing is the importance of those community relationships, the barbershops, the beauty salons, the local bodegas, and the value of those local community assets to all the families in these communities. we have opportunities for book nooks in the fire stations, in hospital clinics, in a lot of our in a lot of the local areas where each year we build a number of book nooks and place these books and fill them with books throughout the year. It's an important process to ensure that books are in the hands of children and people are reading. And then, the other piece of it, as Jill mentioned, was the Free Library of Philadelphia was the backbone agency for the campaign for grade level reading known as Read by Fourth. And in that campaign, we, it's still very, very active. And, it is the thing where you have 130 community partners participating in what each and every one can do to support these learning activities, these playful learning activities in their communities. And so that campaign maintains a very high level of significance and does have significant backing by the mayor as well as the city council, and as sort of the thing that helps young children and families. The other important thing, as you've been hearing, again, the importance of the public side of things is it's important that the library was aligned recently with the fairly new deputy mayor for children and families. And so rather than having it under sort of this loose sort of undefined area, it is now part of this deputate of children and families. So the library and the Parks and Rec Centers and the health department and some community services are all aligned under the same deputy mayor, so that there is alignment, and there is not only on the policy side of things, but on the funding side of things. And so the other part, I'm running on and I'm sorry because I'm watching my time, is that the other part of playful learning on a lot of levels can come out of cooking. And at the Free Library, we developed what was called a culinary literacy center. And I don't think you realize how often in your own family's kitchen, how much subliminal learning actually occurs. Not only is the conversation important, but it's also all of the math and the science and all of the fun areas that a child is able to achieve learning. How did I do?
You did great. You did great. And we'll have a chance to hear from you again too, and all the speakers in the last half hour. But thank you very much for the remarks and for building in both your experience with the Free Library as well as your general thoughts as you kind of hear these different people coming together and looking at the really important topic. So thank you. All right, we're going to pose a couple questions. I'm going to turn it over to Helen. She's going to lift these up. We have some great questions that have been in the Q&A. We won't have time for all of them, but she's going to lift up a couple, and then we're going to go into the second segment of our time together. So I'll turn it over to Helen.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. Thanks for these great questions in the Q&A. And I'm sorry that we aren't going to get to addressing all of them, but I did want to direct one question. Someone asked, this is for Bosmat, and they would like to learn a little bit more about how you conducted your research at the playgrounds, as you highlighted in your presentation. So maybe just quickly, what tools did you use? And they also asked a question about were there researchers that were dispersed throughout the city? So just, I guess, like the logistics around that, because it sounds like a big beast of a project. So just learning a little bit more about that.
Yes, well, I have to tell you that it was really thanks to the collaboration with the foundation. They started to do the research with us for us. I can tell you, probably such as every other city, collecting data was not something at our nature. This is something we learned that it's so important to work with. But the way to do it is really to pick up a few locations that you go and do observations and even questionnaires to parents at the same time every week for a period of time. So it could be looking at weekdays, mornings, afternoons, or weekends. And you have to come in advance and see what you want to learn. So for example, for us, it was how much time kids can spend on equipment, or how much time kids were talking to their caregivers. So people, yes, imagine students standing there and actually with a watch, looking at measuring time, and then putting together all this data. We're working with a company that knew how to bring this data to some conclusions, because it's not enough to collect the data. It's also what kind of conclusions you are reaching from it. So yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bosmat. And the second question quickly that I think I'll open it up to any of our presenters that want to answer this one. We had a great question about partnering with colleges or universities, really to increase the awareness and assist in the implementation of these ideas. So if anyone has partnered with universities or colleges, I'll just say quickly for Playful Learning Landscapes, the project that I lead at Brookings, it's based on a body of work that is collaboration with Temple University and developmental psychology researchers that have looked at the impact of these spaces on caregiver-child interactions. But if anybody has any other quick comments on that question, we'd love to have those.
No, I just wanted to jump in and say we worked with Temple University and Kathy Hurst-Passick's lab in developing the play spaces that we put in the libraries and on the outside.
Any of other speakers want to jump in on university partnerships?
I'll just add, in our work with cities, we're noticing a growing trend towards children's cabinets. And I know a lot of them have engaged some community partners that include higher ed. It's been really successful in some of their early childhood systems building work moving forward. So that's another interesting avenue that some cities are taking in terms of how they're structuring their governance around young kids and families.
Thank you. All right, I think we're going to go to the second part of our session today, which is really around action steps and how you can take all this great information and ideas and actually operationalize it and put it into action in your own communities. So we're going to hear from all our speakers in kind of rapid fire segments to give you a sense from their perspective as to how some actions can be taken. We're going to first start with Helen, and if you can pull back up the share screen. Helen has some slides that lift up some of the work from Playful Learning Landscapes and their playbook, and we can actually put that playbook link back in the chat as well for you to be able to access that. So while we're putting that share screen back up, Helen, if you want to start, we can go straight to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. So I just wanted to lift up and share this beautiful new resource from Playful Learning Landscapes Action Network. These are our partners in Philadelphia that work closely with cities on implementing playful learning in their communities. So hopefully you can read it. It's also in the chat, the link to access this beautiful new playbook. Next slide, please. So this is one of my favorite sort of parts or pages from the playbook. And this talks about free play and how to transform that into playful learning. So free play is great, has so many benefits for kids, but it can also be pretty easily transformed into playful learning, which has a learning goal. So I'll just take the top example quickly. So children love to climb up anything, right? So climbing up a pole to the playground netting, that's an example of free play, but it can be turned into playful learning if you add some hatch marks, some sort of marks on that pole, indicating how high kids are climbing, right? Or just add some numbers next to it. So they got to number 3 or number 4, or, you know, if they're really lucky, to number 5. And then kids start talking about, I got to number 3, well, I got to number 4, right? Hopefully that doesn't result in some fight between children, but rather spurs this conversation about numbers and comparison and measurement. Next slide, please. So a wonderful part of the playbook is dedicated to talking about the how and what of playful learning. So here we see the 5 principles of how children learn. So children learn when it's meaningful, when it's connected to their everyday experiences, something they're familiar with. They learn when it's joyful, when it interests them, it taps into their intrinsic motivation, natural curiosities about the world. And it's also, they learn better when it's socially interactive. We're social creatures. We want to connect with other people. It's the same for children. They want to play with other children, other people, other adults. We also want playful learning to be actively engaging. So we call this minds-on learning. So we don't want children to be sitting back passively absorbing information. They want to get their hands dirty. They want to get into the learning. And then children also learn when it's iterative. They learn from repetition, as much as that might sort of grind on us a little bit to read the same stories and play the same games over and over. That's how young children learn. Next slide, please. And then related to this, we talk about what kids could learn. So to really thrive in our very fast-paced, globalized, more and more technology-based world, we want children to be learning what we call the 6 C's. So these are around communication and collaboration and having confidence and being creative and engaging in critical thinking, and also remembering that important part of the content of what they're learning as well. Next slide. And then lastly, just to lift up a few of the beautiful examples that are showcased in the playbook. This is called jumping feet. These are called DIY examples, sort of examples where it could pretty easily be implemented in many different spaces, on the sidewalk, in a park, in a museum, in a library even. So this is jumping feet, a different way to play hopscotch. So this builds children's what we call executive function skills, so their impulse control and being able to think flexibly. So it asks children to put one foot where they see 2 feet and vice versa. So kids have to pause, think about what they're doing, and then act. And so it really physically, it promotes physical activity and is it game-like. So children love sort of jumping and playing this game. And then lastly, next slide. Another example is this life-size ruler. So this was embedded in a museum exhibit called Parkopolis, a life-size board game that promotes science and math learning. So you put a ruler down on the floor or on a sidewalk, and what do kids want to do? They want to jump. They want to see how far they can jump and how far their friend can jump and how far their mom or dad can jump. And again, this spurs conversation and thinking about numbers and measurement and comparison, and builds children's early math skills. So that's just a snapshot of this beautiful playbook that you can access on the Playful Learning Landscapes Action Network website. Back to Jill.
Thanks, Helen. No, this is great. And I just want to call out, you see where it has estimated cost, difficulty to build, complexity of implementation. It's very tangible. And I think when we were designing the session, we really wanted to talk about both the tangible and the intangible, the things that, that may cost money or that cost a lot or a little bit of money, but also the relationships, the collaborations, the trust, and the kind of intangible side of putting this work into action. So I think over the course of the next few minutes, we're hoping you kind of can lift up both the tangible and the intangible for moving this into action. We're going to turn it over to Anna. She's going to talk a little bit about some action steps, and then we'll hear from Dia and Bosmat and Siobhan. So I'll go to Anna.
Thank you. Next slide. So here we just wanted to share some strategies for engaging with your elected officials. I think the biggest tip from our perspective over at NLC is to really engage with your mayor. They're the vision setters often for cities. And so if you want to elevate the importance of early childhood, it's a great opportunity to use the mayor's bullpit to do so. The second tip is really use the city's role as a community convener to bring partners together. Dia spoke a little bit about this in her remarks, just as they used some of the resources we developed at National League of Cities with our counterparts over at the Center of Study of Social Policy to really use those resources to bring community partners together, but also city agencies. And then also really think about one of the trends that we're noticing with communities is dedicated staff who are able to serve as that kind of convening body, similar to Dia's role, but it's a role that we're seeing across the country as really an ability to kind of leverage partners and bring stakeholders to the table. And then the third tip I would have would really just be engage with your city planning department to identify some of those spaces that could be better served for young kids and families. And so, Dia mentioned some great places at the WIC waiting rooms, but, the city planning department has a good pulse on what some of those spaces are. And so that would be a great way to get started as well. So those are just 3 strategies.
Thank you, Anna. And there's some really good questions in the Q&A that Helen's going to lift up in a few minutes that talk about elevator speeches and tangible, like how can you get your cities to move in this direction. So I just want to thank those who've posted those notes in the Q&A. And if other people have questions, please post them. And even if we can't get to all of them, we can at least have them there and try to get responses to you at a later date. We're going to turn it over to Dia. She's going to share some of her thoughts on moving this work into action from her experience in Milwaukee.
So in the last 2 years, some of the steps Milwaukee has taken since I've been in this role It's really identifying champions to get this ball rolling. And actually, that happened before I got into this position. Thankfully, there were champions that got together with community leaders and our common council members to talk about what are the priorities for Milwaukee in early childhood education, and how do we start to build a roadmap to advance care for our families. And so one of the things that came out of that was dedicating a space such as the Office of Early Childhood Initiatives to really focus on those priorities. It's important to have someone, I think, that is always thinking about this work, even as a, this work is a preventative measure. And so even if you have, created your early learning city, or you are on a good path to making sure your families are thriving, it's important to maintain that. And so it's not something that would go away. And hiring someone to manage and having a strong infrastructure to build that. One of the things that Anna just mentioned was, the mayor. And so our mayor is very supportive of early childhood education, and my office started off inside of the library, and effective January 1, we'll be actually moving into the mayor's office so that there can be more alignment with other city departments and support around this work. So Milwaukee is just moving in the right direction in terms of what we're doing for children and what's best for children. The other thing I want to mention is creating an advisory council. It's important to, I keep saying, bring people along, have a diverse group from all, sectors to continue to give that input and, to go out and be those ambassadors and work on, your plan and your North Star. And then the part that also is important, every step is so important, is that ongoing communication about priorities and, and how do you get input from folks. And so, so that, again, people are always weighing in and buying in and feeling like they too are part of shifting the atmosphere, because we can't shift the atmosphere and mindsets with just, again, one person, one office. So those are the steps that we have taken so far today.
Thank you, Dia. And I think that feeds really well into the same question for Bosmat. What are some of the ways in which you would really want to suggest action steps could be taken? What are some of your recommendations for what you've seen work in Tel-Aviv, Yafo?
Yes, so next slide. Yes, we can go quickly. So my 5 tips would be, first, people asking what is exactly my role being a project manager of Urban 95. So I saw it really being an agent of change. I was the person who woke up in the morning and asking myself what I'm going to do today to make Tel Aviv a better city for children and their families, and who do I have to work with to make it happen. So definitely this is, I think, you need to have a person this is their job, that this is what they're thinking of. Next slide, please. A second thing we did was to create a group of people from different departments, and we took them to a study tour in Copenhagen. We wanted them to go and see what a good city can look like. Sometimes it's not enough just to see presentations, and we wanted them to experience this and even to meet parallel positions from the Copenhagen municipality to bring them inspiration. So it was really unique. I think it was the first time we haven't done it in Tel Aviv, to have such a diverse group of people going together for a study tour. But it was such a point of change for us that next slide, when we came back, you can see that you can change, yeah. You can see that we put the focus on early childhood by having so many different partners. So we're working with city architect, transportation, everyone around this round table. And we meet once in a month or 2 months, and we have this forum of working together, so we know how to share what projects are on and to really work in a great collaboration together. So it's not just a matter of community or education or health, but it needs a whole table, a round table of everyone in it. Next slide, please. The third would be, alongside with strategic planning, I think that for us was also looking for, at least at the beginning of our work, to look for quick wins that are visible. that people can react to. And you can see that residents are happy, and also that city leaders are happy. And from that pilot, which also don't cost a lot of money, you can do pilots or experiments, then go to measurement and see if you need to adapt your intervention and move to more scale and sustainable system. And we can move to the next one, please. And this has already been talked. I'm not going to elaborate. Working, of course, with the community and creating political will. We brought a lot of data in, saying that early childhood has a really small window of opportunities, and if you invest $1, then you can pay it back by $10. So it was really also an economic issue that was on the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Bosmat. And you heard her say, how do you position this so that people from different stakeholder groups really hear the message, the political will, the cross-sector discussions, and this idea of quick wins and experiments, I think, is something that really resonates with us too. All right, we'll turn it over to Siobhan. She's going to share some thoughts on the same question. You can go off of the screen share, and then Helen's going to be lifting up some of your questions for our panelists.
So I think the only thing I would really add, because I completely agree, is that you really do have to have your community stakeholders intimately involved in what you're doing in order to create buy-in. But I also think one of the things that's important is to have your community advocates. And we have this thing here in Philadelphia called reading captains, and they go around to each of the neighborhoods and knock on doors and try to engage community on the things that are going to work to help make sure that those young people are actively learning in some way, shape, or form. And then the only other thing that I would add is that, and it's been mentioned, Anna mentioned it in particular, you really do need to know where your community assets are, where the playgrounds are, and you know, where the museums are, the rec center. All of these places have wonderful play opportunities for that continuous learning opportunity.
Thank you very much. All right, I'll turn it over to Helen. And if our presenters want to go put your videos back on, then we can ask you, or she can ask you the questions that some of our participants have raised up before we do closing comments and close out. So I'll turn it over to Helen.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. I'm going to ask, we had two recent questions and they're, I think, related, and it's around sort of when you have city leaders that don't have a background in early childhood, what could be, like, what's a good elevator pitch, or what do you want to lift up to them so that they would consider, you know, play spaces in the city, and what are the benefits that you can highlight so that they think of that as a good investment? So I don't know, maybe let's start with Dia, and maybe some of your thoughts on that question.
Sure. And I was typing an answer to another question, and you're asking about city leaders that might not have an affinity or might not be into early childcare. So I think it's really important to find the commonality in that person that you're talking to. Surely there's something about early childhood that is going to spark that person, whether it's a memory of their childhood, you know, good or bad, because, you know, bad may make them be more motivated to make changes. Good may make them want to make sure other children have that same opportunity. And so it's worth it to get to know the person and figure out what is it about them that's going to get them to be motivated. You know, it's kind of like teaching. What is their motivator? It could be the fact that, you know, they're approaching retirement, and who's going to care for them, and what are the folks who's around today to be able to do that, and how do we prepare the little ones to be able to take on all kind of roles. So I hope that answered.
Thank you, Dia. Bosmat or Anna, did you have anything to add to that? Good elevator pitches, or how you might be able to win over. I think, Bosmat, you shared some of that you had to win over some of your, you know, the leaders of the city agencies to really make it relevant to their lives and how they could play a role.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's in a higher question of level for us. I think it was important for the municipality to keep these residents in. And so if we want to keep young families in the city, we need to look at what do they need. So it could be also bringing them playful opportunities, but it's in a wider issue of what is the city has to do to make it for a better impact on the lives of young families and their children. So by bringing in the data and saying, if we're not going to do something, these people will leave because it's too expensive to live in the city, we have to think about much more wider sense of impact, I think.
Thanks, Bosmat. Anna, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just following up on Bosmat, I think that's very true in terms of how we message this work to the city leaders. And that is, your job is to create thriving communities, and that starts with families. And I think one of the things that we encourage our city leaders and especially our early childhood advocates is to connect it to some of those broader city priorities. So when we think about things like juvenile justice or justice reform or housing or a lot of those other economic development, really being able to connect that work with the importance of focusing on young kids and families and how those two are interconnected, I think has been really helpful in some of the work to bring city leaders on board.
I just want to add, one of the things that's important is that when you're approaching city leadership is that you have the school district along with you, so that the communication just sort of is a back and forth between those civic assets and the fact that it's supported by the school district and the things the school district needs to have in place in the out of school time opportunities.
Great, thank you. Jill, I think I'll turn it back over to you so we can wrap up with some closing thoughts.
Yeah, thank you to everybody. So we just want to give you one last chance, all of our speakers, presenters, commentators, to share any closing thoughts, anything you really want to make sure our participants take away from this conversation about scaling playful learning and the role of civic infrastructure to advance meeting children and families where they are. So I think we're going to work backwards. We'll start with in terms of our original presentation order. So we'll start with Siobhan, then go to Bosmat, Dia, Anna, and then close with Helen, and then I'll just do a quick.
I just want to say, have some fun with this. I mean, the thing is, this is playful learning, and so you do have to fail fast, fail often, and give people an opportunity to test things out. And but I think that you have to have some fun with this whole process in it, because this is meant not to be overly structured, and I think that that's going to be important as well.
Yes, I'm going to continue this. I think do experiments and try and see how children and parents react to that. And if it goes well, just continue. I think this is the best test we can have, and that's it.
Dia?
Sorry about that. So my final thoughts, I guess, would be in all things that you do, get those parents involved, bring them along, and let them, help make some of the decisions about what you're doing.
Anna?
Yeah, and I would just add that I think when it comes down to, opportunities to engage your city leaders, this is an easy win. I think there's high visibility in creating spaces that are going to be attractive for young kids and families. And it's a way to kind of have one of those early wins before thinking about some of the bigger early childhood systems building work that you'd want to do in your communities. So, I think starting off with that, I think, and engaging your city leaders is, I think, a great first strategy.
And Helen?
Yeah, so yes, echoing so much of what everyone else has said on this. I think also to remember the kids in this. This is not only for them, but it can be created with them. So I've heard lots of examples of playful learning initiatives where kids they co-design with the children. Kids have awesome ideas of what they want to see, and so taking really listening to them and giving them a chance to have a voice in this process. I just wanted to lift that up as a closing thought.
Thank you all. I just want to share one closing thought, and then we'll close out the segment. But at a time that's been so full of despair and sadness and difficulty for all of us, the fact that we're ending our GLR Learning Tuesdays webinar series for 2020 with this topic, which is so hopeful and so visual and so inspiring and so tangible and action oriented is just so encouraging for me. And I really, really want to thank each of you for sharing your amazing work and your inspiration with us and for the people on the line. It's meant a lot to all of us to be able to see the work that you do and know the impact that it has and will continue to have on our youngest learners and their families. So I just want to thank you for all that. There's a quick closing slide we just want to put up for all of you on the line, just to remind you about our upcoming webinar in January. We're taking a few weeks off. We wish you all very, very happy holiday season, but we really encourage you to come back on Tuesday, January 12th for GLR Learning Tuesdays at 3 p.m. We're going to have a really, really good conversation with Randy Weingarten with AFT and Becky Pringle with the NEA. Very timely, given what's going on right now in this country as we transition into looking at learning loss recovery and really getting that vaccine out there and disseminated and have people start thinking about what's next for all of us as we think about learning. So just want to thank everybody again. Have a happy, healthy, safe holiday season. Thank you for being with us, and we'll look forward to seeing you in 2021. And thank you again to our speakers. You were amazing. Good job. Take care, everybody. Happy holidays.